Good morning, everybody. Ron David from I.C.E Firearms and Defensive Training here with the next episode of what we're doing to review the Montgomery County Council's recent upholding of their concealed carry laws here in Montgomery County, Maryland. First and foremost, I'd like to go back to the Bruin decision by the Supreme Court, where the Bruin decision said that governments can outlaw the carrying of firearms in 3 distinct locations: polling places, legislative assemblies, and courthouses, nothing else. Bruin, beyond that, was pretty silent. They did say that where states can completely ban firearms, noting that courts could use analogies to these historical regulations of sensitive areas, meaning that they could actually derive more locations where these sensitive locations should be identified to ban us from carrying a gun. I think at the end of the day, we just need to see what they recommend. Now, since Heller, the court has pretty much remained silent, and that was back in, 2014? So we're really talking about a 10-year stretch. And why were these restrictions placed? These restrictions were placed because we wanted to protect the government deliberations from any kind of violent interference. We're talking county government, state government, federal government. We just don't want people to go in willy-nilly and violently get their own way. So what did Montgomery County do? They took that list of 3 locations, polling places, legislative assemblies, and courthouses, and came up with their own list. So right now we have 1,262 public bikeways where we can't carry. We have 605 houses of worship where you cannot carry. 693 public parks, 260 private schools, 136 elementary schools, 260 middle schools, 25 high schools, 42 public recreation centers. The list goes on and on and on. So they decided to have a huge overreach of government that is completely unjustified and totally against what the Second Amendment has worked on, and what the Supreme Court and Heller has really come out and said, this is the extent of your limitations, government. Some of that has been ignored because I believe that some of our local county council feel like they're smarter than the Supreme Court, but all of us at this point kind of feel that way. What I'd like to get to is this sensitive places doctrine that was done following the Bruin case. It was done by a couple of law professors, and the conclusion that they came to after this exhaustive review of sensitive locations throughout the United States, and this was a time and history review. So they went all the way back to the 1300s in Old England, where James I and James II didn't like each other, and they were trying to strip all of their citizens of their gun rights. Now, let me briefly say, I'm just going to give you the conclusion of this study that was done about sensitive places. But it says, despite Heller's dicta, wide-ranging bans on bearing arms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings have a weak foundation in history and tradition. Bans in particular government buildings such as legislative buildings, polling places, and courthouses have a very strong founding and tradition. So given a relatively thin historical record in support of sensitive place doctrine, attempts to elaborate and to extend sensitive place doctrine is very, very difficult. Often the simpler approach would be to uphold a locational ban on bearing arms whenever the government carries the burden of proof under heightened scrutiny. So the bottom line here is even the most scholared individuals have a real difficult time identifying all of these places as sensitive places for various legal reasons that have already kind of gone through the courts and have had their due process. What we really need to do now is start to uphold these decisions both at the local, state, and federal level. And this far overreach by the Montgomery County Council needs to be recognized for what it is, because it is a taking of our rights. It needs to be stopped, and it needs to be reversed by this